guy like that doesn't drive a car like that, Officer Dale Pruitt muttered to himself and reached for the door handle. The Cedar Brook Plaza parking lot shimmered in the Tuesday afternoon heat, 91 degrees. The asphalt soft at the edges, the air above it rippling like water. It was the kind of afternoon where nobody moved faster than they had to. Shopping carts rolled slowly. Conversations happened in the shade. A sparrow picked at something near the Whole Foods entrance, with the unhurried confidence of a creature that understood it had nowhere more important to be. Across the lot, a black man in a faded Georgetown University sweatshirt was loading groceries into a black Chevrolet Tahoe. He moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency, bags transferred from cart to trunk in smooth, deliberate sequences, each item placed rather than dropped, the weight distributed with an unconscious precision that a casual observer would never notice, and that spoke to anyone trained to read such things, of a man accustomed to moving through the world without wasted motion. From the rear seat of the Tahoe, faint and muffled through the closed windows, came the audio of a children's cartoon, something with singing animals, upbeat and cheerful, entirely at odds with what was about to happen 40 feet away. Nothing in this scene was illegal. Nothing was suspicious. Nothing justified the attention Dale Pruitt was paying to it, or the decision he had already made, or the door handle he was already pushing open. Dale Pruitt had spent 12 years developing what he called his instinct, the specific, practiced certainty of a man who has convinced himself that his prejudice is perception. He had never once questioned it. He had never faced a consequence serious enough to require him to. That was the problem. And in approximately 4 minutes, it was going to become his. He didn't run the Tahoe's plates before he stepped out. He never did. Running plates first created a record of a clean vehicle before a stop, which made the paperwork harder to justify afterward. He had learned this from a man he trusted. He had done it this way for 9 years. He had stepped out of his cruiser and walked toward 347 different drivers, with his hand resting on his holster and his conclusion already written. And not one of those 347 stops had ever produced a consequence he couldn't manage. He was very confident this would be the same. He was wrong in a way he could not yet begin to measure. The man transferring grocery bags into that Tahoe was 38 years old. His name was Marcus Webb. In the previous 18 months, he had stood within arm's reach of the Vice President of the United States on 19 separate occasions. He was the senior detail leader of the Secret Service's Vice Presidential Protection Division, a member of the counter-assault team for 9 years, a former Army Ranger for 6 years before that, a man whose personnel file was classified at a level that Dale Pruitt's department credentials could not access, could not search, and could not begin to interpret. On his left wrist, Marcus Webb wore a matte black watch with a small recessed button on the lower left side. If held for 3 seconds, that button transmitted a priority distress signal to his team's encrypted frequency. He had never used it outside of training. He was about to use it in a grocery store parking lot. Dale Pruitt crossed the asphalt with the swagger of a man who had never once been wrong. The man loading strawberry cereal into the trunk of that Tahoe turned around and put both hands where they could be clearly seen, and waited. Cedar Brook Plaza sat at the intersection of Millhaven's old money and its new, a carefully landscaped commercial development anchored by a Whole Foods on the east end and a Williams-Sonoma on the west, with a row of boutique shops between them selling things that cost more than they needed to. The parking lot was broad and well maintained, the asphalt resealed annually, the painted lines crisp and white. The trees at its perimeter were mature and full, deliberately selected for their canopy rather than their height. Even the trash cans had tasteful wrought iron surrounds. It was the kind of place where a police cruiser, idling at the far end of the lot, read as reassuring. Community presence, visible deterrence, the neighbourhood taking care of itself. Nobody shopping at the Whole Foods on a Tuesday afternoon was doing anything wrong. Nobody in this parking lot was a threat. The most dangerous thing that had happened in Cedarbrook Plaza in the previous 6 months was a minor fender bender near the Williams-Sonoma entrance that had resolved peacefully with the exchange of insurance information. There was no reason for a police officer to be watching this parking lot with the focused, predatory attention that Dale Pruitt was currently applying to a man loading groceries into a Tahoe. There was no reason, and Pruitt did not need one. An hour earlier, Marcus Webb had been in the Whole Foods with his 4-year-old daughter, Chloe, on his hip, navigating the wide aisles with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to moving through complex environments with a small person attached to him. Chloe was wearing a yellow dress and white sneakers and a very specific expression, the expression of a 4-year-old who has identified exactly what she wants and is waiting, with the patience of someone who has not yet learned to doubt that the universe will provide it. For the moment of delivery, the strawberry cereal, specifically a box of it, on the 3rd shelf of the breakfast foods aisle, with a cartoon bear on the front that Chloe considered a personal friend. Marcus picked up the box. He read the nutrition label. He read it with the focused attention he brought to everything, not because he was uncertain, but because he had spent 15 years in environments where incomplete information got people hurt. And the habit of complete assessment had long since stopped being a professional tool and become simply the way his mind worked. Sugar content acceptable. Whole grain listed first, no artificial colours. He put it in the cart. Chloe beamed at him with the specific, total, uncomplicated joy of a 4-year-old who has just won the most important negotiation of the day. He kissed the top of her head. His phone buzzed. A text from Angela. Don't forget the milk. Whole milk. Not 2%. Chloe can tell the difference. He smiled. He put the phone away. He pushed the cart toward the dairy section with Chloe pointing the way as if she were navigating. Marcus Webb was 38 years old. He was broad-shouldered and 6 feet even, built with the kind of dense, functional musculature that came from 15 years of physical work rather than a gym. His hair was kept short and neat. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow from a training exercise in his 3rd year with the counter-assault team. A piece of concrete shrapnel from a simulated breach. Unremarkable in the context of his career, and sufficiently invisible that Angela had never noticed it. He wore a faded Georgetown University sweatshirt because it was comfortable and familiar. Dark grey athletic shorts and clean white sneakers. He had bought the sweatshirt 11 years ago. He had no intention of replacing it. He did not look like what he was. This was partly deliberate and partly simply the result of a man who had spent 9 years on one of the federal government's most elite protective details and had learned over those 9 years that the ability to move through public spaces without projecting the nature of his work was not a liability but a tool. Secret Service counter-assault team operators are not supposed to look like counter-assault team operators. They are supposed to look like the most unremarkable person in any given space, until the moment arrives when they are required to be something else entirely. Marcus was very good at this. He was currently in a mandatory 48-hour stand-down. The Secret Service's pre-mission protocol required that all detail personnel complete a minimum rest period before any active protective assignment, a regulation born from the operationally documented reality that fatigued agents made errors. And errors in this line of work had consequences that no protocol could undo. The Vice President was scheduled to attend a fundraising dinner in Millhaven on Thursday evening. Marcus was the senior detail leader. He had been in stand-down since Tuesday morning. Angela was at work. Chloe had a Tuesday off from daycare. A teacher planning day that had appeared on the family calendar in Angela's handwriting, with a note beside it that read, "Your turn." Marcus had taken Chloe to the Whole Foods because the refrigerator needed restocking, and because a Tuesday morning with his daughter at a grocery store was, in the arithmetic of his life, an uncomplicated gift. There were things about Marcus Webb that a person watching him in the Whole Foods parking lot would notice without understanding what they were seeing. He had backed the Tahoe into its parking space. He always did this, in every lot, in every city, regardless of whether it was convenient. It was not a conscious decision anymore. It was the accumulated product of thousands of hours of tactical vehicle training. The automatic positioning of a man who had spent his career thinking about how to move quickly in the direction he chose rather than the direction he happened to be facing. When he opened the Tahoe's rear door to check on Chloe, she had fallen asleep briefly on the drive over, and he wanted to confirm she was comfortable in her car seat. He positioned his body between her and the open lot without thinking about it. Just stood there, briefly, filling the gap between his daughter and the world. On his left wrist, he wore a watch. It was matte black, military specification, with no brown markings and a face that was clean and readable at a glance. On the lower left side of the case was a small, recessed button, slightly below the crown. If pressed and held for 3 seconds, it transmitted a priority distress signal on an encrypted frequency monitored continuously by his team. The signal included his GPS coordinates and a timestamp. The protocol for a priority distress signal from a detail leader during stand down. Full response. ETA reported en route. No questions asked. It had been designed for situations where communication was not possible. He wore the watch on stand-down days the same way he wore it on active assignment days, not because he expected to need it, but because a man who has spent 15 years preparing for the unexpected has long since stopped distinguishing between days when preparation seems necessary and days when it doesn't. He transferred the last bag from the cart to the trunk. He reached up to press the automatic close button on the Tahoe's tailgate. Across the parking lot, the cruiser's door swung open. Marcus noticed it. He noticed everything. Not anxiously, not with alarm, simply as a matter of how his attention worked. He had no reason to be alarmed. He had done nothing wrong. The lot was public. His vehicle was legally parked. His shopping was legal. His presence was legal. He noted the cruiser's position and the angle of approach as he would note any variable in his environment. Filed, assessed, no immediate action required. He stood with both hands visible, his back to the trunk, and waited to see what the officer wanted. The officer's hand was already on his holster before he was 10 steps from the cruiser. Marcus noted this too. Dale Pruitt had not always wanted to be a police officer. This was perhaps the first and most important thing to understand about him. The distinction between a man who chooses law enforcement out of genuine vocation and a man who arrives at it because it is the first thing that makes him feel significant. Pruitt's father had been a cop. His uncle had been a cop. His older brother had been a cop for 4 years before a DUI, and a subsequent department investigation ended that particular family tradition. The badge was not an aspiration in the Pruitt household. It was a baseline expectation, the way some families expect their children to inherit a business or a trade. Pruitt joined the Millhaven PD at 29, later than most recruits. After a decade of work that had never quite taken hold, a year in construction, 3 years doing equipment logistics for a regional distributor, 2 years managing a storage facility, a stretch of time in between that he described on the application as independent contracting, and that had mostly involved doing whatever was available. None of it had suited him. None of it had provided the specific sensation he was looking for, which was the sensation of being positioned above rather than among, of having authority that others were required to acknowledge. The badge provided this. From his first week on patrol, Dale Pruitt understood that he had found the right container for what he was. His psychological evaluation at hiring had flagged concerns, specifically around impulse control and what the evaluating psychologist had described, in careful professional language, as a sensitivity to perceived challenges to authority that may manifest as disproportionate response in high-pressure field situations. The department was understaffed. The union had a long-standing position that psychological evaluations should be advisory rather than determinative in hiring decisions. The flag was noted and filed. Pruitt was given a badge and a gun and a sector on the east side of Millhaven. His first 2 years were unremarkable. He received standard reviews. He had no complaints. He appeared, from the outside, to be doing the job. Then he met Captain Roy Haller. Haller had been with Millhaven PD for 22 years when Pruitt joined. He was a large man with the particular cultivated stillness of someone who has learned that power does not need to be loud to be effective. He ran the department's patrol division with an organizational philosophy that prioritized internal loyalty above all other considerations, not as a stated policy, obviously, but as a demonstrated practice, communicated through behavior rather than instruction. Haller had, over his career, assembled a small group of officers, 6 at peak, including Pruitt, who understood the implicit arrangement, in exchange for a specific kind of loyalty, which included not questioning certain practices and not filing certain reports with certain details. These officers received a specific kind of protection. Complaints were reviewed by Haller personally, reviews were managed, paperwork was softened or delayed until it became inert. The arrangement had operated without disruption for 11 years before Marcus Webb drove a black Tahoe into the Cedarbrook Plaza parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in July. Pruitt had 16 use of force complaints on record. Everyone had been reviewed by Haller. Everyone had been dismissed. Average time from filing to dismissal, 9 days. He had also, through Haller's explicit instruction, learned to run plates after rather than before initiating contact with the stopped vehicle. The logic was operational and the implications were deliberate. A clean plate run before a stop created a documentary record that the vehicle and driver had no outstanding issues before Pruitt approached, which made it harder to articulate post hoc justification for the stop. Running plates after, or not at all, left the record clean in the officer's favour. Pruitt had been doing this for 9 years. Nobody had ever formally challenged it. That morning, before his shift, Pruitt had opened his personal phone and navigated to an app whose icon looked like a standard weather widget. Inside was a private encrypted messaging group called The Watchman. 17 members, all of them current or former law enforcement from 3 counties, none of them using their real names in the group. Pruitt's handle was Roadwork. He had been a member for 4 years. He had contributed 847 messages. That morning, a member called Ridgeline had posted a photograph. A minority driver standing beside an expensive car on a highway shoulder, hands raised, the angle suggesting it had been taken from a dashcam. Ridgeline's caption, "Adjustment made, car checked out clean," but the lesson was delivered. Some people need reminding about where they are. 11 members had responded. 3 used specific words that Pruitt, in some private corner of himself, understood he should not be reading on a law enforcement officer's phone. He read them anyway. He had laughed. He had put the phone away. He had driven to Cedarbrook Plaza for his routine patrol of the commercial district. And he had been thinking about Ridgeline's post when he saw the black Tahoe. This is important. The watchmen were not peripheral to what happened next. They were its context. They were the community of validation that had reinforced over 4 years. The belief that what Pruitt called his instinct was a legitimate professional tool, rather than a bias that should have disqualified him from carrying a badge. The group had told him, repeatedly, that he was right, that the stops were correct, that the targets were correct, that the consequences, the people standing on highway shoulders, the people searching through their property for documents they should not have needed to produce, the people absorbing the specific humiliation of being treated as suspects in the middle of ordinary life, were correct. He had believed it. He had constructed an entire interior justification around it, complete with its own private vocabulary. The word he used, internally, for the feeling that drove these stops, the feeling of seeing a black or Hispanic person in a context his prejudice told him didn't fit, was displacement. He believed he was correcting a displacement. He believed he was restoring a correct order to a space that had been disturbed. He had believed this so long, and so completely, and with such consistent external reinforcement, that it had stopped feeling like a belief and started feeling like a fact. In the cruiser's passenger seat, Officer Carlos Mendez looked up from the mobile data terminal when he felt Pruitt shift in his seat and reach for the door. Mendez was 24 years old and 6 months out of the academy. He had been assigned to Pruitt as a field training officer 3 weeks ago. In those 3 weeks, he had quietly begun keeping a personal notebook, a small, spiral-bound thing that he bought at a CVS on his lunch break and kept in his left breast pocket. In the notebook were dates, stop locations, plate numbers, and brief observations. He had started it because he did not know what else to do with what he was seeing. He had not yet decided what he would do with what he had written. He looked through the windshield at the parking lot. He saw a black man in a grey sweatshirt closing the trunk of a Tahoe. He saw grocery bags. He heard, faintly, a child's cartoon from inside the vehicle. He saw nothing else. "What are we looking at?" Mendez asked. "Suspicious behaviour," Pruitt said, already pushing the door open. "He's just loading groceries. Brad." Pruitt looked at him. The look was not angry. It was the look of a man who has decided that a particular conversation is not worth having with a particular person who does not yet understand how things work. "You'll learn," Pruitt said. He hit the lights. Mendez sat in the passenger seat for 3 seconds. Then he opened his door and stepped out and followed, because he did not know yet what else to do. But his hand went to his breast pocket, where the notebook was, and he noted the time. Pruitt parked the cruiser diagonally behind the Tahoe. the front bumper angled to block the vehicle from pulling straight back. He was out of the cruiser before the engine was fully off. A small, telling detail. The body language of a man who has already determined the outcome of this encounter and is impatient with the procedural distance between his current position and that outcome. His right hand rested on the butt of his holstered Glock. Not drawing, just present, just reminding. He approached from the rear quarter panel, not straight on, but offset to the passenger side rear, a position that forced the man at the trunk to turn his head at an uncomfortable angle to establish eye contact. And that put Pruitt's body outside the Tahoe's direct line of sight. Haller had taught him this. Stand where they have to work to look at you. It establishes geometry before you say a word. Marcus had already turned around. His hands were at his sides, open and visible, fingers slightly spread, not raised, not defensive, not performatively compliant, but clear. He had turned fully to face the approaching officer, giving Pruitt an unobstructed view of both his hands and the front of his sweatshirt, which was untucked and unremarkable and contained nothing that bulged or shifted. He had positioned himself, without appearing to position himself, so that his body was between the cruiser's approach angle and the Tahoe's rear door, where Chloe sat. He did not speak first. He let Pruitt make the opening move, because he had spent 15 years watching the way people moved in high-pressure situations, and he had learned, early and completely, that the opening move told you everything you needed to know about the kind of situation you were actually in. Pruitt stopped 6 feet away. His chin came up slightly. Step away from the vehicle. Not good afternoon. Not, sir. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Not, can I help you with something? Just step away. The command of a man who has already decided what the situation is and needs the subject to arrange themselves within it correctly. Marcus took one slow step to the left. One step. Hands visible. Body angling to maintain the position between Pruitt and the Tahoe's rear door. He moved 6 inches. That was all. Is there a problem, officer? His voice was even, not warm, not cold, level. The voice of a man providing information. Pruitt's eyes moved over Marcus. The grey sweatshirt, the shorts, the sneakers, the closed trunk behind him, the grocery bags visible through the Tahoe's rear window, the child's cartoon audio barely audible through the glass. His jaw set. Whose vehicle is this? Mine. My daughter is in the back seat. I'm loading groceries from the Whole Foods. ID now. Marcus did not reach for his wallet. He spoke instead, clearly, without haste, in the tone of a man conveying accurate information to someone who needs it. Officer, I haven't committed a traffic violation. I'm parked legally in a designated parking space under state law, without reasonable articulable suspicion that I've committed a crime. You're not authorized to demand my identification. I want to be cooperative with you, and I will be. But I'd like to understand the basis for the stop first. It was not a challenge. It was not aggressive. It was the calm recitation of accurate legal information by a man who knew the law precisely because his career required it, delivered in the tone of someone who assumes the other person is capable of receiving it. Pruitt's face changed. Not immediately. Not all at once, but in a sequence that Marcus tracked with the practiced attention of a man who reads faces the way other people read text. First, a slight narrowing around the eyes. Then, a specific quality of stillness in the jaw, the kind that proceeds rather than follows a decision. Then, the flush beginning at the collar, moving upward. He had been told no, in public, by a black man in casual clothes, in front of Carlos Mendez, who had positioned himself at the rear quarter panel of the Tahoe, and was currently looking at a trunk full of grocery bags and a child's face visible through the rear window, watching her cartoon. To Dale Pruitt, this was not information. It was a challenge. His training, not the Academy's training, but Haller's training. The 9 years of reinforcement that told him authority unchallenged was authority maintained, told him exactly how to respond to challenges. He closed the distance by 2 steps. He was now 4 feet from Marcus. Listen to me very carefully. He said the word then. The specific word, said quietly, close to Marcus's face, with the ease of a man who has used it before and faced no consequence for it. He said it the way someone uses a tool they are accustomed to having, without emphasis, without drama, with the casual authority of something that has always worked. Marcus registered it, his jaw tightened by a fraction, a motion so small it was visible only to someone watching his face with the specific attention of a trained observer. And Carlos Mendez was watching with exactly that attention. Marcus's training overrode the reaction in less than a second, not suppressing it, cataloguing it. The word, at that moment, in that specific context, with that specific delivery, was now part of the record he was building. You are going to give me your ID, or I'm going to search you and find it myself. This is your last opportunity to make this simple. Marcus looked at him. Officer, I strongly suggest you think very carefully about what you're about to do. It was the calmest possible sentence. It was also, to Dale Pruitt's ear, in that moment, the most infuriating thing anyone had said to him in 12 years on the job. Bystanders had gathered, not a crowd, not yet, but the particular clustering of people who have paused their ordinary activities because something in the air has signalled that what is happening nearby requires attention. A woman with a jogging stroller had stopped at the edge of the lot, 20 feet to the east. She had one hand on the stroller handle and one hand not yet on her phone, weighing something. Her face in the specific expression of a person deciding whether what they are seeing is bad enough to document. An older man, 64, walking a chocolate lab, had stopped on the sidewalk at the lot's north perimeter. He had his phone out. He had been filming for 40 seconds already. He had recognized the geometry of this stop, the cruiser angle, the holster hand, the body position, with the immediate, complete recognition of a man who had spent his entire life learning to recognize it. He was not trembling. He was very still. His streaming was live, inside the Tahoe. Chloe Webb had reached the part of her cartoon with the singing animals. She kicked her feet in the car seat. She was happy. She could not see the parking lot from her position. The car seat faced slightly inward. The tablet was propped at the angle Marcus had set it, and her view was of the headrest in front of her and the screen in her hands. She had no idea. Marcus needed her to stay that way. Carlos Mendez stood at the rear quarter panel of the Tahoe. He looked at the grocery bags through the glass. He looked at Chloe's feet moving happily in the car seat. He looked at Pruitt's hand moving toward his holster. He thought about his notebook. He thought about what the notebook was for. Pruitt said, "Final warning." His hand closed around the grip. "Think carefully," Marcus said again. quiet. Absolute. Pruitt unclasped the retention strap, the snap of it releasing that specific, small, metallic sound. Travelled across the 4 feet between them and hit Marcus in the chest like a change in atmospheric pressure. He had heard that sound thousands of times. In training, in drills, in the operational briefings where they walked through every scenario, including the ones nobody wanted to imagine. He had never heard it in a grocery store parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in July. His tactical processing activated without decision, the way breathing activates, automatic, complete, immediate, distance, 4 feet, cover, none within reach. Chloe, rear seat, passenger side, partially shielded by the Tahoe's frame. Threat, Officer Pruitt. Glock 17, not at low ready, barrel coming up. Trigger finger, moving toward the guard. Stance, weight forward, emotionally driven, no secondary positioning. Assessment, this man will fire if startled. The trigger finger was the most dangerous element. A trained officer keeps the finger outside the guard until the moment of deliberate discharge. Pruitt's finger was moving inside it before the weapon was fully level. One startle, one unexpected sound, one car door opening. That was all it would take. Marcus did not move a single muscle that had not been specifically approved by conscious decision. On the ground, Pruitt said. Face down. Now. The woman with the stroller made her decision. She took out her phone. The Tahoe's cartoon audio drifted through the closed windows. The singing animals. Cheerful. Oblivious. Marcus raised both hands. Slowly. Clearly. Palms forward and open. I am complying, he said. His voice was steady. My daughter is in this vehicle. Please keep your weapon pointed away from the car. On the ground. I am going to my knees now. Both hands visible. He lowered himself, deliberately. Each movement telegraphed. Nothing sudden. First to his knees on the hot asphalt, then forward onto his hands, then flat, lacing his fingers behind his head with the precision of a man who has been trained in exactly this, and understands that every movement must be unambiguous. The asphalt was 91 degrees, and rough, and smelled of oil and summer, and it pressed against his cheek and his forearms. And he noted these things the way he noted everything. Filed, present, part of the record. He thought about Chloe. He thought about the angle of her car seat and the position of the tablet and the fact that she was watching the singing animals and did not know. He made this his primary objective. She would not see this. He would handle everything else. The law, the rights, the case he was already building, the press of a stranger's knee that was about to arrive on his spine. But his daughter would not see this, and she would not carry this. And that was the thing that mattered most right now. Pruitt's knee landed in the center of his back. Full weight. The breath left Marcus's lungs in a controlled exhale. Not a gasp, not a cry. A managed release. The breath of a man who has absorbed physical impact before and knows how to move through it without it owning him. The handcuffs went on, too tight, deliberately so, the metal biting into the wrist bones on both sides. Marcus noted the specific pressure. Evidence. Not so tough now, Pruitt said, near his ear. Thought you could get smart with me. Marcus said nothing. He was listening to the parking lot, the ambient sounds, the positioning of the bystander voices, the rhythm of Chloe's cartoon audio, the distant click of Carlos Mendez's notebook opening behind him. he was building the case. The retention strap had snapped open 43 seconds ago. In those 43 seconds, Dale Pruitt had drawn a Glock 17 service weapon in a grocery store parking lot, levelled it at the chest of a man who had committed no crime, ordered that man to the ground with a loaded firearm aimed at his centre mass, knelt on the man's spine with his full body weight, and applied handcuffs with deliberate, punishing tightness. 11 people were filming from various angles. One was streaming live. Pruitt was not thinking about any of this. He was in the specific altered state of a man who has acted on impulse and is now constructing, in real time, the narrative that justifies what he has done. He was thinking about probable cause, how to articulate it, which phrase Haller had always found most defensible, how to frame the radio call he would need to make. He was thinking about his report. He was not thinking about the child watching cartoons 6 feet from where the gun had been pointed. Marcus was thinking about the trigger finger. He had noted it from the moment the weapon cleared the holster. Pruitt's index finger inside the guard before the barrel was level. He had noted the weight distribution. Forward heavy, emotionally driven. No secondary positioning. No situational awareness of the bystanders in the background, who were now, from the gun's trajectory, within a potential ricochet radius. This was not a trained officer securing a threat. This was a man feeding a decision he had already made, using a weapon as punctuation. If Marcus had moved unexpectedly, a sneeze, a stumble, a startled reflex, he was statistically certain the weapon would have discharged. If Chloe had opened her car door, he pressed that thought down. He filed it. He would bring it out later, in a room with different acoustics and a jury and a microphone, and he would describe it with the same clinical precision he was applying right now, and the people in that room would understand exactly what had almost happened in this parking lot. But that was later. Right now, his objectives were simple and sequential. Stay still, stay alive, keep Chloe from seeing this, and wait. Carlos Mendez stood at the rear quarter panel of the Tahoe and watched Dale Pruitt kneel on Marcus Webb's spine. He had been riding with Pruitt for 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, he had watched 6 stops that followed the same pattern. A minority driver, an expensive or out-of-state vehicle, Pruitt's hand moving to his holster before he was out of the cruiser, the manufactured smell of marijuana, the extended search that found nothing. The driver eventually released shaken and smaller than before. He had written each one in the notebook. Dates, locations, plate numbers. The pattern of which drivers Pruitt chose and which he drove past. He had started writing because he did not know what else to do with what he was seeing. He was 6 months out of the academy. He did not know if what he was documenting constituted something he could report, or whether reporting it would end his career before it had started. He knew now. He knew because the man on the ground was not shaking. He was not crying. He was not panicking. He was lying face down on the asphalt of a parking lot in 91-degree heat, with his hands behind his head and someone's knee on his back, and he was absolutely, completely still. Not the stillness of fear, but the stillness of a man who is doing something deliberate with the time he has been given. Mendez reached into his breast pocket. He took out the notebook. He looked at the man on the ground, and he looked at Pruitt's knee, and he looked at the grocery bags visible through the Tahoe's rear window, and he wrote the time and the location and 2 sentences. Then he took out his personal phone and photographed the page. Then he looked at Pruitt and said, "Brad, we need to run his ID." "When I'm ready," Pruitt said. Mendez said nothing more. He put the notebook back in his pocket. He kept his phone in his hand. Inside the Tahoe, Chloe Webb had reached the part of her cartoon with the dancing sequence. The singing animals were joined by others. Frogs, she thought. Or maybe frogs that were also birds. And they were all doing the same dance, which Chloe found very funny. She kicked her feet in the car seat. She said something to herself. Too quiet for anyone outside the car to hear. She was happy. She did not know. The Tahoe's rear door was 12 inches from where Marcus's hands were cuffed behind his back. If Chloe decided she wanted to get out, if she grew bored with the cartoon, if she heard something outside, if she simply did what 4-year-olds sometimes do, which is open car doors without announcing their intention, she would push the door outward into the space where a Glock 17 had been leveled 4 minutes earlier. Marcus had positioned himself when he went to the ground with this geometry in mind. He could not control the door from where he was. He could only stay still and trust the cartoon to hold her attention for however long this needed to take. He trusted the cartoon. He lay on the asphalt and listened to the lot at the north perimeter of the parking lot. The older man with the chocolate lab had been filming for 2 minutes and 14 seconds. He was 64 years old, and his name was Raymond Howell. And he had spent his entire adult life in Millhaven, and he knew every version of this scene. The cruiser angle, the holster hand, the body on the ground, because he had seen versions of it before, and because his father had described versions of it, and because his son had called him 3 years ago from a highway shoulder in another state. Voice steady, but hands shaking. To tell him about a stop that had lasted 45 minutes and found nothing and ended with an apology that wasn't an apology. Raymond Howell was streaming live to a Facebook account that had 340 followers. He would have 2,400 by the time he got home. He would have 19 million views by the end of the week. He was very still. The lab sat beside him, alert and quiet, as if the dog understood that stillness was required. The woman with the jogging stroller was filming now too. She had made her decision, not immediately, but when Pruitt's knee went into the man's back. That was the moment she stopped weighing it and simply started recording. Her hands steadier than she expected them to be. The specific steadiness of someone who has decided that what they are doing matters. 20 feet away, in the Whole Foods entrance, a teenage store employee had stopped on his way to retrieve carts and was filming with his phone. He had watched the whole thing from the entrance. He had not known whether to call someone. He had decided that filming was the most useful thing he could do. 3 separate recording devices. 11 total at the peak of the incident. 1 live stream. Pruitt knew none of this. He was thinking about his report. Additional units arrived, 2 more cruisers, responding to Pruitt's radio call, which had described an uncooperative suspect and a potential stolen vehicle. The officers who stepped out of those cruisers did so with weapons at low ready. The posture of people responding to an active threat. They saw a black man in a Georgetown sweatshirt, face down on the asphalt, cuffed, Pruitt's knee on his back. They saw an open Tahoe trunk with grocery bags inside. They heard a child's cartoon from the Tahoe's rear seat. Officer Jamie Torres, 7 years with Millhaven PD, assigned to the North Sector. Someone who had worked near Pruitt's orbit long enough to have developed specific private concerns that he had never formalized, took in the scene and moved his weapon to safe. He walked to Pruitt. "What do we have?" "Uncooperative suspect. Possible stolen vehicle. Refused to ID it." Torres looked at the Tahoe. He looked at the grocery bags. He looked at the cartoon audio. He looked at Mendez, who was standing at the rear of the Tahoe, holding his personal phone and looking at Pruitt with an expression that Torres read in less than a second. "We need to identify him," Torres said. "If he won't produce IDs, we go through his pockets." "Do it," Pruitt said, standing, removing his knee from Marcus's back. Torres crouched beside Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to check your pockets for identification. I'll tell you before I touch you." Marcus, from the ground. "Front right pocket. Be careful when you remove what's inside." The specific instruction, "be careful," made Torres pause for half a second. It was not the instruction of a man hiding something dangerous. It was the instruction of a man managing a situation. Torres reached into the front right pocket of Marcus's athletic shorts. His fingers found a wallet, slim, matte black leather, heavier than expected. He stood up. He flipped it open. The badge was gold on silver, a specific weight, a specific construction, the kind of credential that exists in exactly one place in the federal government. The holographic seal caught the afternoon light. Opposite the badge, a photo ID, laminated, with microprinting along the border that Torres couldn't read with the naked eye, but that he recognized, had seen once before, at a joint training exercise, and had never forgotten, as the specific format of United States Secret Service, identification. Torres stopped breathing for a moment. He read the credentials. He read them again. He looked at the man face down on the asphalt in the Georgetown sweatshirt. He read the credentials a third time. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at Pruitt. "Brad," Torres said. His voice was very careful and very quiet. "You need to look at this." Pruitt crossed to Torres and took the wallet from his hand. He looked down at it. 3 seconds of silence passed. In those 3 seconds, the ambient sound of the parking lot continued, the distant HVAC hum of the Whole Foods, the cartoon audio from the Tahoe's rear seat, the rustle of the older man's dog at the north perimeter, the faint sound of 11 different phones held at various angles. None of it registered. Pruitt was looking at a gold badge on a silver shield and not processing what he was seeing, because what he was seeing, if processed correctly, would require him to immediately and completely revise every decision he had made in the previous 7 minutes. And his brain, the brain of a man who has spent 12 years operating on the certainty of his own instincts, was refusing. "It's fake," Pruitt said. His voice had lost its authority. What remained was something smaller and more frantic. "It's a prop. Where did you buy this?" On the ground. Face pressed against the hot asphalt. Hands cuffed behind him. Marcus Webb shifted his focus. The civilian act, the careful, deliberate performance of an ordinary man navigating an unjust stop, was no longer the right tool. What was needed now was something different, something that spoke a different language. He spoke it. "Officer Torres." His voice came from the ground and filled the space around it regardless. It was the voice of a man who had briefed rooms at the Secret Service field office and sat in motorcade planning sessions and spoken directly into the ear of the Vice President of the United States when the situation required it. A voice calibrated for clarity and authority and the complete absence of anything that could be mistaken for doubt. Look at the holographic seal on the credential card. It's a federally issued seal, 16 specific light refractive layers that cannot be reproduced commercially. Look at the border microprinting. It reads USSS at 0.3mm. You'll need your phone camera's zoom to confirm it, but it's there. Badge number is 4471. You can verify through the Secret Service field office in this state in under 4 minutes. A pause. In my vehicle, in the center console lockbox, is a federally issued Sig Sauer P229. The lockbox is biometric. My thumbprint only. Do not attempt to open it. The system logs unauthorized access attempts and transmits them to the field office. Another pause. I am the senior detail leader for the Vice Presidential Protective Assignment beginning Thursday in this city. You have handcuffed and detained a federal agent without probable cause. The officer who drew his weapon did so without probable cause, without a lawful order being refused, and without any articulable threat. He did it in front of witnesses who are currently recording from multiple angles, including one live stream that has been running for approximately 3 minutes. The last pause. Every second these handcuffs remain on my wrists. The situation gets worse for everyone in this parking lot except me. Torres was very still. He looked at the credential. He looked at Pruitt, who was still holding the wallet, whose hand was now visibly trembling, not dramatically, not collapsingly, but with the specific fine motor tremor of a man whose adrenal system is responding to information that his ego cannot yet accept. Brad. Torres's voice was careful, very careful. The voice of a man choosing his next step on uncertain ground. Brad, I need to call this in. He's lying, Pruitt said. He stole the car. He probably stole the badge. You're going to call this in and make us both look. Brad. He's not federal. There's no way that man is. Torres turned away from Pruitt. He keyed his radio. Dispatch. This is Torres at Cedarbrook Plaza. I need a patch to the United States Secret Service field office. Priority verification request. Badge number 4471. Repeat. 4471. The radio crackled. Dispatch confirmed. A hold. A transfer. Then a voice, professional, precise, from the field office. The verification took 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Torres listened. He said 3 words. Confirmed. Understood. Thank you. And released the radio. He turned to Pruitt. He said nothing for 2 seconds. Then, get the key. Pruitt did not move. Carlos Mendez moved. He was already beside Torres, notebook in his breast pocket, personal phone in his hand, and he reached past Pruitt and unhooked the handcuff key from Pruitt's duty belt before Pruitt had processed the decision to resist. Pruitt's hand came up. Don't you... and then stopped, because stopping it was the only thing left that he could control, and he was running out of things he could control very quickly. Mendez moved behind Marcus. He inserted the key. The mechanisms released, both cuffs, left then right, and the metal fell away and hit the asphalt with a sound, like a small, final verdict. Marcus brought his arms forward. He rubbed his wrists with slow, deliberate pressure, restoring circulation, noting the depth of the marks the cuffs had left. He did not stretch dramatically. He did not sigh. He moved his hands in front of him and looked at his wrists for a moment. And then he looked at his watch, the recessed button on the lower left side. He pressed it, held it for 3 seconds. Released. Then he got to his feet, He stood at full height, 6 feet even, broad-shouldered, completely still. And for the first time since Pruitt had stepped out of the cruiser, the geometry of the parking lot changed. The man who had been on the ground was standing. The man who had put him there was holding a wallet in a trembling hand. Marcus looked at Pruitt. He looked at him with the specific level attention of a man completing a threat assessment, not angry, not triumphant, simply professional and complete. "Officer Torres," Marcus said, still looking at Pruitt. "Thank you for the verification. I'd ask that you secure his duty weapon until your superior officer arrives." Pruitt's face went through several things in rapid succession. He opened his mouth once. He closed it. He looked at Torres, at Mendez, at the crowd of bystanders and their phones, at the Tahoe with the grocery bags and the child's cartoon audio, at the wallet in his own hand with the gold badge facing upward in the afternoon light. He looked, finally, at Marcus. And in that look, for just a moment, beneath the denial and the calculation and the desperate internal scramble for a version of events that could still go his way, he saw what Marcus Webb actually was. Not a man who didn't belong in this parking lot. Not a man loading a car he didn't own. Not a target. Not a displacement. Not a category. A man who had been on the ground, who was standing now, who was looking at him with the calm, complete authority of someone who had been through much harder things than this, and had not broken, and who was not going to need anyone's help with what came next. Pruitt looked away first. The signal from Marcus's watch reached his team's encrypted frequency at 3:47 p.m., 11 minutes after Pruitt had first stepped out of the cruiser, 7 minutes after the handcuffs had gone on, 4 seconds after Marcus pressed and held the recessed button on the lower left side of the matte black case. The transmission included his GPS coordinates, his agent identification code, and the priority classification, code Red, detail leader, active distress. Special Agent in charge, Frank Kowalski, was in a hotel conference room 3 miles from Cedar Brook Plaza when the signal came in, running through logistics for Thursday's VP visit with 2 advanced agents and a Millhaven PD liaison. The liaison was in the middle of a sentence about parking access when Kowalski's encrypted device vibrated. He looked at it. He stood up. He said to the room, "We're moving." He was 61 years old, silver-haired, with the specific physical presence of a man who has spent 30 years in rooms where the wrong decision had permanent consequences and has learned to move through those rooms without any motion that hasn't been decided in advance. He did not explain to the liaison what was happening. He did not take questions. He and his 2 agents were in the Suburban and moving within 90 seconds. They covered 3 miles in 8 minutes. The black Chevrolet Suburban with covert federal plates rolled into the Cedar Brook Plaza lot without sirens, without lights, at a pace that was deliberate and unhurried in a way that was, paradoxically, more authoritative than speed. It moved through the lot with the specific quality of something that knows exactly where it is going and does not need to announce itself. It parked directly alongside the cluster of police cruisers, not behind them, not at a respectful distance, alongside, at an angle that put its front bumper level with the lead cruiser's door. Kowalski stepped out. His 2 agents followed, both in tactical configuration, hands near weapons. The specific physical posture of people who have sized up a situation from a moving vehicle and arrived with a clear operational picture. Kowalski himself wore a dark suit with no tie, and he moved across the parking lot asphalt with the economy of a man who has been doing this for a very long time. He did not look at Pruitt. He did not look at Torres, or Mendez, or the bystanders, or the phones. He walked directly to Marcus Webb. He stopped in front of him. He looked at Marcus's wrists, the marks the cuffs had left, still visible. He looked at the asphalt marks on the knees of the athletic shorts. He looked at Marcus's face. Agent Webb, Kowalski said. Status: unlawful detention, assault under colour of law, firearm drawn without probable cause. Marcus's voice was level and precise, not recitation, just reporting, the same way he would report a site assessment. The detaining officer drew his service weapon and levelled it at my centre mass without a lawful basis. I was forced to the ground and handcuffed by the detaining officer, who applied the restraints with deliberate excess tightness. Duration of unlawful detention: approximately 11 minutes. Pause. My daughter is in the vehicle. She's unharmed and unaware. The scene is unsecured. Kowalski turned. He looked at Pruitt for the first time. Dale Pruitt was still holding the wallet. He had been holding it for the entirety of the verification call and the handcuff removal and Marcus getting to his feet. And he was still holding it now. And the gold badge was still visible, facing upward, catching the afternoon light. His hand was no longer trembling with the fine motor tremor. It had progressed to something more visible, not dramatic, not collapsing, but the specific, involuntary shaking of a man whose body is responding to the gap between what he expected this afternoon to be and what it actually was. He was 41 years old. He had 12 years on the job. He had 16 dismissed complaints and 9 years of Haller's protection and 4 years of the watchman's validation and a deeply constructed interior architecture that had, until approximately 30 minutes ago, been entirely sufficient to make him feel untouchable. Every pillar of that architecture was in the process of collapsing simultaneously, and he could feel each one going, and he could not stop any of them. Kowalski stopped in front of him. He said, in a voice calibrated for the specific people present and no one else, quiet enough to be professional, clear enough to be unmistakable. The FBI Civil Rights Division was notified 14 minutes ago. Your department's patrol commander is 2 minutes out. Until he arrives, you will not move your hands toward your duty belt. If you do, my agents will treat the movement as a lethal threat. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Pruitt opened his mouth. He had spent 12 years as the person in situations who opened his mouth and had his words acted upon. He had the muscle memory of it, the breath drawn, the jaw set, the delivery of instructions that others were required to follow. He reached for that muscle memory now and found it entirely absent. What he had instead was the wallet in his trembling hand, and the gold badge, and the crowd of bystanders and their phones, and Carlos Mendez's notebook in Mendez's breast pocket, and Torres standing 3 feet away, looking at him with an expression that said everything that professionalism was preventing Torres from saying aloud. He closed his mouth. Kowalski turned to Torres. Get those cuffs off my agent. Already done, sir, Torres said. I removed them approximately 4 minutes ago. Kowalski looked at Torres for a moment. He nodded once. Then the patrol commander's cruiser arrived. Captain Dana Harrison, 9 years in command. A compact and deliberately principled woman who had spent those 9 years working methodically against the specific culture that Haller had built, without sufficient evidence to act on any specific case until now. She stepped out of her cruiser, surveyed the scene in 10 seconds, The federal agents, the crowd, the phones, the grocery bags still visible through the Tahoe's rear window. Marcus Webb in a Georgetown sweatshirt standing with Kowalski, and understood what had happened before anyone explained it. She pointed at Pruitt. Her voice was completely steady. Badge, weapon, now. You were suspended pending termination proceedings. Pruitt looked at her. He looked at the wallet in his hand. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the camera phones. He looked at the ground. He removed his badge. He removed his weapon from its holster. The Glock 17 that had been levelled at a man loading strawberry cereal. And he handed both to Harrison. His hands were empty. The parking lot was very quiet. The Whole Foods HVAC hummed. Chloe's cartoon audio drifted through the Tahoe's windows. The crowd of bystanders, all of them, all their phones, all their angles, watched in complete silence. Marcus walked to the Tahoe's rear door. He opened it. Chloe looked up from her tablet. She had reached the part where the animals took a bow, which was her second favourite part after the dancing. She looked at her father, at his face, which had shifted from what it had been in the parking lot into something warmer and different, the specific face he kept for her. And she had no particular reaction to the change because this was simply Daddy. And Daddy's face was always this face when he looked at her. "Hey, sweetheart," Marcus said. "Almost done. You okay?" "Yes," Chloe said. "The frogs were funny. Yeah? They danced wrong. Did they?" "On purpose," Chloe said, with great seriousness. "For comedy." Marcus looked at his daughter for a moment. Something in his face, some residual tension from the last 17 minutes. The asphalt and the handcuffs and the trigger finger and everything else shifted and released very quietly, like a door being gently closed. "We'll get ice cream on the way home," he said. "Strawberry. Double," Chloe said immediately. He closed the door. He turned back to the parking lot. He went back to work. Angela Webb was in a project planning meeting on the 4th floor of the Meridian Architecture Group when the notification arrived on her phone. A push alert from a news aggregator she had downloaded 2 years ago and largely forgotten about, which had been quietly learning her interests and delivering relevant headlines ever since. The headline read, "Video. Millhaven officer draws weapon on black man in Cedar Brook Plaza parking lot. Federal investigation underway." She looked at the notification for 3 seconds. The meeting continued around her. Someone was discussing load-bearing specifications for a commercial renovation on the east side. Angela opened the notification. The video was 47 seconds long. The camera angle showed a black man face down on the asphalt of a parking lot she recognized. She had been to the Whole Foods at Cedar Brook Plaza a dozen times, with a uniformed officer's knee on his back. The man on the ground wore a grey sweatshirt. Georgetown University. She recognized the sweatshirt before she recognized the angle of his shoulders. She recognized the angle of his shoulders before the camera panned enough to show the side of his face. By the time the camera showed his face, she already knew. She had known from the sweatshirt, because she had washed that sweatshirt 200 times, and she knew the specific way the Georgetown lettering sat across the shoulders of a man with Marcus's build. She sat very still for 4 seconds. The meeting continued. She stood up. She said quietly, "Excuse me." She walked to the hallway and she called Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. "I'm fine," he said before she spoke. She closed her eyes. Where are you? Still at Cedarbrook. Federal agents are on scene. I'll be here for a while. A few hours at least. Can you get Chloe? Marcus. I'm fine. Angela, I promise you. She stood in the hallway and held the phone and did not say anything for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, she did the specific arithmetic of 15 years married to a man who walks into dangerous situations and does not call until they are over. And she processed the video of the Georgetown sweatshirt and the asphalt and the officer's knee. And she arrived at the particular form of composure that is not the absence of feeling, but the decision to hold feeling still until there is space to put it down safely. I'll get Chloe, she said. Call me when you're leaving. She went back into the meeting. She gathered her things quietly and left. In the elevator on the way down, she watched the video again. This time her hands were completely steady, which was the specific steadiness of a woman who had made a decision and was acting on it. Her expression for those 47 seconds was the expression of someone doing something that matters and knowing it. She shared the video from her personal account before she reached the parking garage. She had 847 followers. By Thursday, the video would have 19 million views. The FBI's Civil Rights Division assigned Special Agent Patricia Dunn to the case within 2 hours of the incident. Dunn was 43 years old, 11 years in the division, with a case history that her colleagues described as relentless, in the specific way that word is used to describe someone whose thoroughness makes other people tired. She had handled 27 investigations involving law enforcement misconduct. 6 had resulted in federal indictments. Her conviction rate on those 6? Perfect. She drove to the Secret Service field office that evening. She met Marcus in a conference room, just the 2 of them. A recorder on the table between them. A legal pad in front of Dunn. She did not make small talk. She said, "Start from the moment you saw the cruiser. Tell me everything, in sequence, with times where you have them." Marcus spoke for 41 minutes without being interrupted. His account was precise and sequential. Positions, distances, exact language. The word Pruitt had used, and when and in what tone. The position of Pruitt's trigger finger relative to the guard. The tightness of the handcuffs. The pressure of the knee. The duration of each phase of the stop. He reported it the way he reported threat assessments. Completely. Without embellishment. Without editorializing. Without any word that was not accurate. When he finished, Dunn looked up from her notepad. She said, "Did you capture any of it yourself?" "I was on the ground with my hands cuffed behind my back." "The bystanders did," Dunn said. She opened her laptop and turned it toward him. 11 separate recording devices. Raymond Howell, the man with the dog at the north perimeter, was streaming live. His footage ran for 6 minutes and 40 seconds before Kowalski arrived. The angle covers the entire stop, including the draw. She played 30 seconds of it. Marcus watched the screen without expression. "There's also this," Dunn said. She navigated to a second file. The cruiser's secondary backup audio system. It activates automatically when the light bar is engaged and stores to the county server. Officer Pruitt has never been informed the system exists. It was installed department-wide as part of an infrastructure update 18 months ago. The notification memo was distributed by email. According to the server logs, he has never opened the email. She pressed play. The audio was clear. The parking lot's ambience. Pruitt's voice. The retention strap. The commands. The specific word said close to Marcus's face. Chloe's cartoon. Faint and cheerful in the background. Dunn pressed pause. She looked at Marcus. I'm going to apply for a federal search warrant for his personal devices. Given the federal victim status and the evidence already in hand, I can get it expedited. 48 hours. Maybe less. Marcus nodded. He said, there's something else you should look for. Tell me. A group encrypted messaging, probably through an app that looks like something else. He's not doing this alone. This pattern, this behavior, the specific confidence of a man who has never faced a consequence. That kind of confidence doesn't come from nowhere. Look for who's been telling him he's right. Dunn wrote this down. She underlined it. She looked at what she had written for a moment. I'll find it, she said. The search warrant arrived in 31 hours. The cyber unit had the encrypted messaging application cracked in 4 hours after receiving the device. They called Dunn at 2:14 a.m. She drove to the field office. She sat in front of a screen in a quiet room with a coffee she didn't drink and read for 93 minutes. The watchman had been active for 4 years. Pruitt had 847 messages. Dunn read them in chronological order, beginning from the group's founding, and she did not stop or look away from the screen. She noted the dates. She noted the descriptions. She cross-referenced, in real time, several of the described stops against the official police records that had been included in the warrant package, and in 11 separate cases. The official records said, no action taken, no contraband found, subject released, while the watchman messages described deliberate harassment, extended illegal searches, property interference, and, in 2 cases, physical force applied without documentation. Pruitt appeared in all 11. He was not the only member who appeared, but he appeared most often, and with the most specificity, and with the most evident satisfaction. When Dunn closed the laptop, she sat in the dark office and looked at the window. Then she picked up her phone and called the U.S. attorney. I have everything, she said. All of it. The warrant for Pruitt's devices led, through financial records and messaging patterns, to Captain Roy Haller within 72 hours. The complaint dismissal record, 16 complaints, 16 dismissals, all reviewed by Haller, all closed in under 2 weeks, had been a visible pattern for years. No federal case had ever required it to be examined at the federal level, because no federal victim had ever been involved. Marcus Webb had changed that calculation completely. Dunn presented the Haller findings to the department's superintendent in a conference room with 2 federal agents beside her. Haller was present. He read the charges: obstruction of justice, conspiracy to deprive persons of civil rights, in complete silence. He set the document down on the table. He looked at the superintendent, who looked at the table. He looked at Dunn, who looked at him with the specific, level patience of someone who has all the time in the world. He asked for a lawyer. He did not speak again. The federal dossier on the Watchman Group ran to 340 pages when Dunn filed it with the U.S. Attorney's Office. It contained 4 years of chat logs, cross-referenced with official police records, civil asset forfeiture reports, use of force filings, and complaint histories from 3 counties. It identified 17 members by name, real names, matched to handles through IP addresses, device fingerprints, and metadata that the encrypted app's developers had believed was unsalvageable, and that the FBI's cyber unit had recovered in 11 hours. Of the 17, 6 were active law enforcement officers. 3 were former officers. 4 were civilian employees of law enforcement agencies. 4 were private citizens with no law enforcement connection who had joined the group through referral from existing members. The group had a recruitment protocol. Existing members could nominate new members, who were vetted through a process that consisted primarily of sharing an initial message that demonstrated alignment with the group's expressed values, which were the specific values of men who had decided that their prejudice was professional insight, and that the documentation of that prejudice in a private channel was not a liability but a record of achievement. Pruitt appeared in the dossier 847 times. He was not the most prolific contributor by message count. That was a former officer from the neighbouring county whose handle was Gatehouse and who had been posting since the group's founding. But Pruitt's messages were among the most specific, the most detailed, and the most evidentially useful, because Pruitt had described his stops with the pride of a craftsman describing his work. And the detail he had taken pride in was exactly the detail that allowed the federal investigators to match his descriptions to official records. The dossier was classified at the federal level and distributed to exactly 3 people outside the investigation team. One of them was Gary Sweeney, president of the Millhaven Police Officers Union. Dunn delivered Sweeney's copy personally. She arrived at the union's office on a Thursday morning, the day of the VP's visit, which had proceeded without incident under a reorganized detail structure. Marcus having returned to active duty Wednesday evening after medical clearance. She had called ahead. Sweeney was at the conference table when she arrived, alone, a coffee in front of him that was mostly untouched. Sweeney had been running the union for 11 years. He had defended 14 officers in misconduct proceedings. He had a record of successful outcomes that he considered the product of his specific combination of legal knowledge and institutional relationships. He was not a man who scared easily. Dunn placed the dossier on the table in front of him. She did not summarize it. She said, "Page 47. That's your officer describing a traffic stop in his own words. Page 112 is the official record of the same stop. I'd like you to read both." She sat down. She waited. Sweeney read page 47. He read page 112. He set both down. He looked at the coffee. He looked at the cover of the dossier. He looked at the wall behind Dunn's left shoulder, where a framed photo of a union picnic hung from 2019. He did not look at Dunn. 22 seconds passed. Then he picked up his phone. He dialed. Someone answered. Sweeney said 4 words. "Pull our support. Now." He hung up. He looked at Dunn. He said, "You'll have a formal statement by end of business today." He had not raised his voice. He had not argued. He had not tried to find a frame in which the dossier could mean something other than what it meant. He had read 2 pages and made a phone call. Dunn respected this, in the specific, limited way that a person can respect the minimum required response when the minimum required response arrives without requiring a fight. She picked up the dossier. She left. Gerald Thorne had built his career on law enforcement defense cases. He was 62, silver-haired, expensively suited, with an office on the 14th floor of a downtown building that had a view of the courthouse. He had successfully navigated 11 times in civil rights violation trials. He was confident in his ability to identify winnable cases. He had taken Pruitt's case because the union was paying, and because, on the surface, what had happened in a parking lot, however badly managed, was the kind of thing he had won before. He read the Watchman dossier the evening it became public federal record. He read it in his office, alone, at his desk. With a glass of water he poured when he sat down and did not touch once. He read it for 90 minutes. He did not make notes. He did not call anyone. He simply read, page by page, the documented record of Dale Pruitt's 9 years. The stops described in his own words, the pattern of targets, the language he used to describe the people he stopped, the evident, enthusiastic satisfaction with which he documented what he had done to them. Thorne had principles. He had set them aside many times in his career, in the way that professionals who operate in adversarial systems learn to set things aside when the fee structure warrants it. The dossier did not permit him to set them aside. The messages were specific and documented and represented a pattern of deliberate, targeted civil rights violations that no jury in a federal courthouse would attribute to anything other than what they were. And Thorne had enough respect for federal juries to know that attempting to argue otherwise would not just lose the case, but damage his own standing in a courthouse he still needed to operate in after Pruitt's trial was over. He sent a 2-sentence email to Pruitt the following morning. He did not take a law enforcement defense case for 14 months. Dale Pruitt sat in the living room of his house on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks after the parking lot, and the house was very quiet. The suspension had been immediate. The termination proceedings had taken 11 days. The pension, 12 years of it, the specific financial foundation of the life he had built, had been forfeited under federal law upon his indictment, which had arrived before the termination was finalized. The mortgage on the house was in his name alone. He had 2 months before the bank's patience would expire. The union was gone. Thorne was gone. The 6 other active law enforcement members of the Watchmen were all facing their own federal processes. 2 had already resigned. 1 was cooperating with Dunn's team in exchange for a reduced charge. 3 were fighting charges with their own attorneys and making clear, through those attorneys, that they were not fighting anyone else's. Ridgeline, whose real name was a former officer from Colton County named Craig Bauer, had retained counsel and issued a statement through that counsel denying any operational knowledge of Pruitt's specific conduct. The message from every direction was the same. Pruitt was alone. His public defender was a young woman named Rosa Vargas. She was 28, 2 years out of law school, handling 24 active cases simultaneously in an office that had 2 working printers and a coffee maker that had been broken for 6 months. She was competent and underpaid and honest, the last quality being, in Pruitt's current situation, the one he found least comfortable. She met with him twice before the trial. Both times she told him the same thing with the same level directness. The evidence is the cruiser audio, 11 separate video recordings including a live stream, the Watchman dossier with your messages cross-referenced against 11 documented stops, the testimony of your rookie partner who photographed his own contemporaneous notes in the parking lot, the testimony of the senior Secret Service agent you detained, and the verification records from the field office. The victim is a 15-year federal agent with an impeccable record. The jury pool has seen the video. I can represent you to the best of my ability, but you need to understand what we're walking into. Pruitt looked at his hands. What are my options? Plead guilty and request leniency at sentencing, or trial. He said he wanted a trial. Vargas wrote it down. She did not editorialize. She went back to her other 23 cases. Pruitt sat in the quiet house for a long time after she left. Leon Farmer was 52 years old, and he had a second work van now, a white Ford Transit. 3 years old, with the Farmer HVAC Solutions logo on both sides in clean blue lettering. He had bought it last year, after the business had stabilised enough that the expense made sense. He drove it carefully, the same way he drove everything, because he had learned, more specifically, he had been taught in the specific way that unwanted lessons arrive, that careful driving on the roads of Millhaven was not sufficient protection against certain things, but that it was still the right practice. 3 years ago, he had been driving his original work van on a residential street in the north part of Millhaven at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, heading to an emergency call. A family whose air conditioning had failed in 90-degree heat and who had a grandmother with a cardiac condition for whom the heat was not merely uncomfortable. He had $4,200 in cash in a zippered envelope under the driver's seat. The previous month's payroll for his 3 employees, withdrawn that afternoon because his business bank account had been flagged for a fraud review and temporarily restricted. The bank had said the restriction would be lifted within 72 hours. His employees needed to be paid that week. He had withdrawn the cash, put it in the envelope, and driven to the emergency call. Dale Pruitt pulled him over 2 blocks from the job site. The stop lasted 38 minutes. Pruitt said he smelled marijuana. He searched the van, the cab, the cargo area, the toolboxes mounted on the interior walls, the space under both seats. He found no marijuana. He found the envelope. He filed a civil asset forfeiture report. The $4,200 was designated as suspected drug proceeds. No charges were ever filed against Leon. No drugs were ever found. No prosecution was ever initiated. The money did not come back. Leon spent 11 months trying to recover it. He hired an attorney, a solo practitioner in Millhaven, who took the case on a reduced fee because he believed in the principle and because Leon was clearly telling the truth. The attorney explained the civil asset forfeiture process in the specific, apologetic tone of someone describing a mechanism they find professionally embarrassing. The burden of proof falls on the property owner, not the agency. Leon would need to demonstrate that the cash was legitimate. Demonstrating it required bank documentation from the period of the account restriction, which the bank had provided incompletely. The legal fees required to pursue the case through a full civil hearing would likely exceed the amount being recovered, even if they won. Leon stopped. He paid the attorney what he owed. He paid his 3 employees 2 weeks late, with an explanation they deserved and a specific private shame that he still carried 3 years later, whenever he thought about that conversation. His nephew Marcus, 19, working his first real job, full of the specific energetic enthusiasm of someone who has just discovered that he is good at something, had quietly found another position 2 weeks after the delayed payroll. Not because he blamed Leon, because he couldn't afford the uncertainty. Leon didn't blame him. He understood the arithmetic perfectly. He had sat in the van on the side of the street for an hour after Pruitt drove away with the envelope. He had sat there because there was nowhere specific to go. The job was still waiting. The family with the grandmother was still without air conditioning. The evening was still happening. But he needed a moment before he could re-enter it. He sat and looked at the steering wheel and thought about what options he had and arrived, one by one, at the same answer. None. The system had been arranged so that there were none. The burden was on him to prove what was obvious. The mechanism of proof was expensive and uncertain and controlled by people with no incentive to find in his favour. He He turned the van on. He drove to the job. He fixed the air conditioning. He drove home. He started taking a different route when he went north. Patricia Dunn called Leon Farmer on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after the parking lot incident. She explained who she was and what the federal investigation had uncovered, and that his stop had been identified through Dale Pruitt's own messages. Bragged about, described in detail, documented by Pruitt himself in the Watchman group, cross-referenced by the federal investigation to the official forfeiture record. Leon was quiet for a long time after Dunn finished explaining. He wrote about it, Leon said. He actually wrote about it. Yes, Dunn said. Another pause. What do you need from me? Your testimony. If you're willing, you can decline. There will be no negative consequence to declining. But we'd like you to tell the jury what happened on that street. Will it matter? Leon asked, not rhetorically, genuinely. Will it actually make a difference? I believe it will, Dunn said. The federal agent who was detained in the parking lot, the one who initiated the investigation, specifically requested that your testimony come before his. He wanted the jury to understand the full scope of who Pruitt was before they heard from a federal agent. You're not supporting evidence, Mr. Farmer. You're the center of it. Leon sat with this for a moment. Tell me when, he said. Patricia Dunn identified 11 additional stops through the Watchman logs. Descriptions specific enough to cross-reference with official records. Each match confirming a stop that had been officially logged as uneventful, while Pruitt's own messages described something else entirely. A nurse from Millhaven's east side, a college professor visiting his daughter, a man transporting his mother's medical equipment across the county, a woman who had been stopped by Pruitt 3 separate times in 18 months and had filed a complaint each time and received a dismissal each time from the same supervisor. Dunn contacted every one of them. She explained what had been found and what the investigation was pursuing and what their options were. She did not apply pressure. She did not suggest that participating was an obligation. 7 agreed to be involved, as witnesses, as civil complainants, as participants in the federal accountability process that was being built around their experiences. 4 declined, 2 citing fear of professional retaliation from officers who were still on duty, 2 simply not wanting to re-enter the experience, which Dunn completely understood and noted in her file without judgment. She called Marcus and briefed him on the victim profiles the week before the trial. He read through the file without speaking. When he finished, he set it on the table and looked at the window for a moment. Make sure Leon Farmer testifies before me, he said. Why? Dunn asked. Because he had $4,200 in a work envelope and no watch with a panic button and no federal team 3 miles away. Pruitt did the same thing to him that he did to me. The jury needs to understand that before they hear from someone who had resources, I want them thinking about Leon Farmer when I take the stand. Dunn wrote this down. She scheduled the witnesses accordingly. A Diana Ruiz was 39 years old and had been with the U.S. Attorney's Office for 8 years. The last 4 specifically handling civil rights cases involving law enforcement defendants. She was methodical in the way that people are methodical when the underlying principle matters to them. Not out of bureaucratic habit, but out of the specific investment of someone who understands what it costs when this kind of case is lost. She did not use emotional language in court. She did not need to. The charges against Dale Pruitt, Deprivation of rights under colour of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Assault with a deadly weapon, civil rights conspiracy. Connected to his documented membership in the Watchman Network and the pattern of targeted stops documented across 4 years. The charges against Roy Haller, tried separately. Obstruction of justice. Conspiracy to deprive persons of civil rights. Pruitt's trial began on a Monday morning in a federal courthouse 60 miles from Millhaven. Venue change granted on the basis of pre-trial publicity, though Ruiz noted privately that the publicity had been, if anything, more extensive in the venue they'd moved to. The jury of 12 was selected over 2 days. Ruiz used her peremptory challenges sparingly. She trusted the evidence. She opened without a speech. She stood in front of the jury and said, "I'm going to show you a video." She played Raymond Howell's footage, 6 minutes and 40 seconds. From the moment Pruitt's cruiser blocked the Tahoe, to the moment Kowalski's Suburban rolled into the lot. The footage was clear, the drawer was visible, the knee on the spine was visible, the cartoon audio was audible throughout, the singing animals, the dancing frogs, the cheerful and completely indifferent soundtrack of a 4-year-old's afternoon in the backseat of her father's car, while someone pointed a gun at her father's chest. The courtroom was silent when the video ended. Then Ruiz played the cruiser audio. She played the retention strap snapping open. She played the specific word Pruitt had used. She played, "Not so tough now. Thought you could get smart with me?" She played Chloe's cartoon, audible in the background. She pressed pause. She looked at the jury. She said, "The man on the ground was loading strawberry cereal for his daughter." She sat down. That was her opening. Leon Farmer took the stand on the 3rd day of the trial. He wore a dark suit. He had bought it for this occasion. He would wear it to his nephew's college graduation the following spring, and the spring after that when his nephew started law school. And he would think about this courtroom at both moments without meaning to and without regret. He testified for 41 minutes. He described the evening in the North Residential District. He described the emergency call, the family with the grandmother, the restricted bank account, the envelope. He described the 38 minutes of search. He described watching the envelope leave his van in Pruitt's hand. Ruiz let him tell it completely. Then she asked one question. "Mr. Farmer, after Officer Pruitt drove away that evening, what did you do?" Leon looked at his hands on the railing of the witness box. "I sat in the van," he said. "I sat there for about an hour." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I needed to understand what had just happened. And the longer I sat there, the more I understood that there was nothing I could do about it. The complaint would go to the department. The department would review it. The money was already gone." He paused. "I thought about the people who would come after me on that road, who would go through what I'd just gone through and not know what I'd learned. And I thought..." He stopped. He looked at the jury box rather than his hands. "I thought I should do something. And then I sat there for another 40 minutes. Because I didn't know what. And because I was afraid of what it would cost to try." The courtroom was completely silent. "I'm not afraid anymore," Leon said. "That's why I'm here." Marcus Webb took the stand on the 5th day. He wore a charcoal grey suit. He sat in the witness box with the posture he always had. Straight, present, still. He did not look at Pruitt, who was at the defense table in a suit that Rosa Vargas had helped him select. and that fit adequately. He looked at Ruiz, and when she finished her questions, he looked at the jury. Ruiz walked him through the stop in sequence. His answers were precise and complete. Times, distances, exact language. The word Pruitt had used, and when they reached the gun, she slowed down. Agent Webb, when Officer Pruitt drew his service weapon, what was your tactical assessment of the situation? My assessment was that I was facing an individual who had made a determination before the stop began and was escalating force to justify that determination after the fact. His trigger finger was inside the guard before the barrel reached level position. That is a specific, documentable deviation from both federal and municipal firearms protocol, and it represents a significant unintentional discharge risk. His weight was forward, and his stance was emotionally driven rather than tactically positioned. He was not securing a threat. He was expressing one. What did you believe would happen if you had moved unexpectedly? I believed he would fire. A startle response, any involuntary physical reaction, would have been sufficient to cause an unintentional discharge given the position of his trigger finger. And if something had caused an unexpected sound or movement from this direction of your vehicle, Marcus looked at the jury, something shifted in his face. A fraction of a degree in the set of his jaw, small enough that a casual observer would not catch it, large enough that every person on the jury who was paying attention registered it without being told what it meant. My daughter was in the vehicle. If she had decided to open her car door, which 4-year-olds do, without announcement, without reason, she would have been in the line of fire of a weapon held by a man whose trigger finger was inside the guard. Ruiz let that sit. 5 full seconds of silence. Then her last question. Agent Webb, in your professional assessment, as someone trained at the highest level of protective operations in federal law enforcement, what was the greatest threat in that parking lot on that afternoon? Marcus looked at the jury directly. The officer, he said. Without qualification, the officer was the threat. Rosa Vargas objected. Judge Harold Briggs overruled it. The answer stood. Nothing further, Ruiz said, and sat down. Vargas cross-examined Marcus for 20 minutes. She was professional and prepared and working with what she had, which was not much. She focused on the discretionary nature of police stops, on the split-second nature of officer decision-making, on the complexity of parking lot situations with limited information. Marcus answered every question the same way he had answered Ruiz's questions. Precisely. Without embellishment, without anger. He was not a hostile witness. He was a factual one. That was worse for Vargas than hostility would have been, because factual witnesses are very hard to impeach. When she sat down, she looked at her notepad. She wrote nothing on it. Judge Harold Briggs had been on the federal bench for 19 years. He was deliberate and economical, known for conducting trials efficiently, for clean and defensible rulings, for allowing the evidence to do the work the evidence was designed to do without judicial embellishment. He had read the Watchman dossier in its entirety. He had read Leon Farmer's deposition and Marcus Webb's tactical assessment and the complaint files of the 7 civilian victims. He had read Pruitt's messages in the group chat, all 847 of them, from the beginning. He did not make speeches from the bench as a general practice. At sentencing, after the verdict, he made an exception. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 51 minutes. The foreperson was a retired middle school science teacher named Barbara Nolan, 61, who had raised 3 sons in Millhaven and had spent 30 years teaching the scientific method, the specific discipline of following evidence where it leads, regardless of where you expected it to go. She read the verdict in a clear, steady voice that carried to every corner of the courtroom, without requiring any particular effort. Guilty on all counts. Dale Pruitt sat at the defense table and did not visibly react. His hands beneath the table, pressed flat against his thighs with a pressure that Rosa Vargas, sitting beside him, could feel through the vibration of the table's frame. She did not look at him. She looked at her notepad, which was blank. She had written nothing on it during the verdict because there was nothing useful to write. Judge Briggs sentenced Pruitt 1 week after the verdict. The courtroom was at capacity. Raymond Howell was in the gallery, the man with the chocolate lab who had filmed from the north perimeter, whose 6 minutes and 40 seconds of footage had been played in this courtroom twice. He was not carrying the camera today. He was simply present, the way witnesses to important things sometimes feel the need to be present for their conclusion. Leon Farmer was in the gallery. He wore the same dark suit. Angela Webb was in the gallery. She sat with a composure that looked like calm, and was in fact the product of a specific discipline, the discipline of a woman who has spent 15 years managing the reality of a profession that takes her husband into dangerous situations, and has learned to hold her response still until it is appropriate to let it go. She would let it go tonight, at home, in a kitchen, with a glass of water and her husband across the table. She had been waiting for weeks. She could wait 1 more hour. Briggs looked at Pruitt across the courtroom for a moment before he spoke. His expression was not contemptuous. It was precise. The expression of a man completing an accurate measurement and wanting to be sure he has it right. Mr. Pruitt, you were given authority over other people, not because you were superior to them, or wiser than them, or more deserving of safety than them, because the community decided to extend that trust, and in exchange for that trust, you agreed, publicly, formally, under oath, to protect them, all of them. He paused. You did not simply fail that agreement. You organized around its failure. You constructed, over 9 years, a practice of targeting people based on their appearance and their perceived displacement from your expectation of who belongs where. You found others who had done the same, and you validated each other's behavior in private messages that you believed were unrecoverable. The federal government recovered them. This court has read them. The jury read them. And the people you described in those messages, without their names, without their humanity, with the specific satisfaction of a man recounting achievements, they sat in this courtroom and told you, and this court, and this country, exactly what those messages actually represent. He picked up the sentencing document. 14 years, federal custody, full forfeiture of all law enforcement pension and retirement benefits, permanent bar from law enforcement employment at any level, in any jurisdiction, in any capacity. It is further the recommendation of this court that the documented record of this case, including the Watchman dossier and the victim testimony, be included in the Federal Civil Rights Division's Officer Accountability Curriculum, so that every future investigator understands what this looked like from the inside before anyone stopped it. The gavel. The consequences arrived in sequence over the weeks that followed. Roy Haller pleaded guilty 6 weeks after Pruitt's verdict, accepting a negotiated charge to avoid the full trial and cooperating completely with the remaining Watchman investigation. He received 4 years, federal custody, and the permanent loss of all pension and retirement benefits accumulated across 22 years. He was 61 years old. He did not speak publicly before or after the plea. Of the 6 active law enforcement members of the Watchmen, 3 were indicted on federal civil rights charges and faced trial in the following 18 months. 2 resigned before charges were filed, entering civil settlement agreements that included permanent bars from future law enforcement employment. 1, a deputy from a neighbouring county who had cooperated with Dunn's team early, received a reduced charge and avoided prison. Though not the end of his career, Carlos Mendez was not charged. His cooperation with the federal investigation had been complete from the first interview, and his notebook, photographed on his personal phone in the Cedarbrook Plaza parking lot at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, was entered as federal evidence and cited specifically by Judge Briggs in his sentencing statement as an example of the kind of individual conscience that the department's institutional culture had been designed to suppress. Mendez requested a transfer to a different department within the week. It was approved within 10 days. He was, by every account from his new supervisors, exactly the kind of officer the job needed. Leon Farmer received a restitution check from the Federal Restitution Fund established as part of Pruitt's sentencing. $4,200 plus 3 years of compound interest at the federal rate. $5,847.12. The check arrived on a Thursday. He opened the envelope at his desk in the front office of Farmer HVAC Solutions. The radio on low in the background. The smell of coffee and machine oil in the air. He read the accompanying letter. He read it again. He did not frame it. He deposited it. He used the principal to make the final 2 payments on the second white van, the Ford Transit with the logo in blue letters on both sides. He used the interest to take his nephew to dinner at a restaurant the nephew had been wanting to try for 2 years, to celebrate the acceptance letter the nephew had received that morning from the paralegal studies program at Millhaven Community College. Dale Pruitt entered federal custody at FCY Morgantown on a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week as the parking lot. He was processed, classified, and assigned to the Protective Custody Unit, standard for former law enforcement, driven by the specific realities of how federal facilities regard officers convicted of civil rights violations. His cell was 8 feet by 10 feet. Door closed with a sound that was different from any other door he had heard, because it had no ambiguity in it. He sat on the metal bunk. The fluorescent light hummed above him. He thought about the parking lot. He thought about the grocery bags through the Tahoe's rear window. He thought about the cartoon audio, the singing animals, the dancing frogs, the small and cheerful sound of a child watching something happy while everything else was happening outside her window. He thought about the moment the door opened, and he saw the gold badge and understood, one delayed second at a time, what he had done. He thought about the look on Marcus Webb's face when Marcus stood up from the ground. Not anger, not triumph, just the specific level, complete attention of a man completing an assessment and finding the situation resolved. He sat with all of it in the fluorescent hum of his first night. Nobody came. The light stayed on. He had a long time to think. The morning after the verdict, Marcus found Carlos Mendez on the courthouse steps. It was not by arrangement. They were both leaving at the same time through the same main entrance. Marcus in his charcoal suit, Mendez in the department-issued uniform of his new department, which fit slightly differently from Millhaven's and which he wore with the specific, careful attention of someone who has not yet decided what to do with the space between what the job is supposed to be and what he has seen it actually be. Marcus stopped. He extended his hand. Mendez shook it. He looked like someone who had not been sleeping well for several months, which was accurate. "The notebook," Marcus said. Mendez looked at him. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know if it would matter. I just wrote it down because it felt wrong to not write it down. That's exactly what it was supposed to be. Marcus said, "You saw something. You documented it. You told the truth when it counted. That's the whole job." Mendez nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I keep thinking about all the other stops. The ones before the parking lot. The ones I didn't document. Write those down too," Marcus said. "If you remember them, write them, give them to Dunn. They may matter. It won't undo what happened." "No," Marcus agreed. "But it might prevent the next one." They stood on the courthouse steps for a moment in the morning light, the Secret Service agent and the rookie cop who had photographed his own notebook in a parking lot. Two men who had been in the same place at the same time and had made different choices and were both, somehow, standing on the same side of what came after. Then they went their separate ways. 3 days after the verdict, Marcus drove to the South Industrial Park in Millhaven. He found the Farmer HVAC Solutions unit without difficulty, 2 white Ford Transits parked outside, the logo in blue letters. He parked beside the nearer van. He went in. Leon Farmer was at the front desk, reviewing an invoice on a clipboard. He looked up. He recognized Marcus from the trial, from the news coverage, from the parking lot video, from the 41 minutes on the witness stand, from the fraction of a degree shift in Marcus's jaw when he talked about Chloe and the car door. "Agent Webb," Leon said. "Marcus," Marcus said. "Please." Leon put down the clipboard. The radio played something low in the background, a news station, turned low enough to register as ambient. The room smelled of coffee and machine oil and the specific organized atmosphere of a place where work gets done. "You didn't have to come," Leon said. "I read your file before the trial," Marcus said. "I wanted to meet you in person." They sat in the 2 chairs in the front office. They talked for 22 minutes. Not about the trial, about the business, about the second van and what it allowed, about the nephew, who was starting a paralegal program in the fall, about Leon's daughter, who was 13, and who had announced 6 months ago, with the specific, unshakable certainty of a 13-year-old who has identified her purpose, that she intended to become a civil rights attorney. She decided after the parking lot video, Leon said. She watched it at school. A teacher showed the class as a current events discussion. She came home and said, "Dad, that could have been you." I said it was me. She said, "I know. That's why." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Tell her to reach out when she's applying to law school," he said. Leon looked at him. "You mean that?" "I know people at Georgetown," Marcus said. "She should know them too." Something settled in Leon's face. Not relief, exactly. Something deeper. Something that had to do with the specific, gradual process of believing again in the possibility of things you stopped expecting. He extended his hand across the desk. Marcus shook it. "Thank you," Leon said, "for not just for coming here, for this." "Thank you," Marcus said, "for sitting in that van for an hour, for not letting it just be something that happened to you. Marcus got home at 6:20 p.m. He could hear Chloe before he opened the door. A specific, high-pitched narrative was being delivered with great urgency from somewhere near the kitchen, concerning events at daycare that apparently required immediate adult attention. He put his key in the lock. The narrative paused, then small feet crossed the floor at speed. The door opened. Chloe was there. Yellow dress, white sneakers, holding a piece of paper that appeared to be a drawing of something large and orange. She held it up immediately. "Daddy, look, it's a lion." Marcus crouched to her level. He looked at the drawing with the specific, complete attention of a man who has been trained to observe everything and is currently choosing to observe this above all other things. "That's a very good lion. His name is Gerald," Chloe said. "He's my friend." "Does Gerald know he's your friend?" "Yes," Chloe said, with great patience. "I told him." Marcus looked at his daughter, at her complete and uncomplicated certainty that Gerald the lion was her friend because she had decided he was, at the yellow dress and the white sneakers, at the way she stood in the doorway of their home with both feet planted and her drawing held out like an offering, entirely sure of her welcome. He looked at her for a long moment. Angela appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Marcus. He looked at her. Some communication occurred between them that required no words. The specific, compressed understanding of two people who have been through something and are on the other side of it and are both, right now, in this doorway. Home. "I promised Chloe strawberry ice cream," Marcus said. "Double." Chloe confirmed immediately. "I'll get the bowls," Angela said. She turned back to the kitchen. She did not say anything else. She didn't need to. Marcus picked up Chloe, the drawing and all. Gerald the lion pressed between them and carried her inside and closed the door behind him. Dale Pruitt's first parole review is scheduled for Year 10 at FCY Morgantown. He has filed no appeals. Rosa Vargas, when asked about this by a legal trade publication doing a piece on the case 8 months later, said only that her client had made a decision she respected and declined to elaborate. She did not take another law enforcement defense case for over a year. Cedar Brook Plaza is still there. The Whole Foods still anchors the East End. On Tuesday afternoons, the parking lot fills with the ordinary rhythm of people running errands, parents with children, retirees with canvas bags, workers on lunch breaks crossing items off lists. The space where a black Tahoe was parked on a Tuesday in July looks like every other space in the lot. Nobody marks it. Nobody has placed anything there to indicate that it matters. 19 million people watched what happened in that space and remember it without being reminded. Marcus Webb never wanted to be a symbol. He wanted strawberry cereal and whole milk, and to be home before Chloe's dinner. But there is a particular kind of person, built by years of standing between danger and the people who never see it coming, who cannot encounter an injustice and file it under things I've learned to accept. Not because of his badge, or his watch, or the encrypted frequency that brought 4 federal agents in 9 minutes. Because of who he chose to be, in a parking lot on his knees on hot asphalt, building a case instead of giving in to fear. The watch on his wrist was a tool. The badge on Pruitt's belt was a promise. One of them was used for what it was designed for. The other was not. The difference between those two objects is the entire story.